Hi everybody!
It's time for me to get something off my chest. I've thought it for years, but it's finally come to a head with this one. The Game Awards are a sham. They always have been, and always will be. The Game Awards aren't about quality, they never have been. It's just a way for the jury to ego stroke the biggest names in the gaming industry. There are games that are so deserving of at minimum a nomination, but they just don't get them because they don't have the biggest fucking names attached to them. Now, I've been on the record as having said this is one of the best years in gaming in numerous videos and social media posts, so I'm not just talking out my arse here. People have called me uninformed on the Game Awards and how they work. No, I'm not. I actually have researched how it works before, and guess fucking what? It's designed to keep the best-selling games at the forefront of the consumer's mind. Anyone with half a fucking brain should realize this isn't how awards should work. It's how awards are also handed out in other professions. They're awarded to whatever the unwashed plebiscites gobble up. And you know how you can tell it's designed to appeal to the filthy masses? Because the public gets a vote in the matter after the jury has selected their nominations. It takes until you hit the best art direction before you stumble on a game that isn't some mass market corporate bullshit. For those who haven't bothered looking up the nominations for this shambolic crapfest, that's the fourth fucking category. Also, guess what? Even in that category, Hi-Fi Rush, the lone game that doesn't have mass appeal so far, is still going up against games that do have mass appeal in this category. So what else is in the category? Super Mario Bros. Wonder, which has the same fucking art style Mario has had for almost 30 fucking years. Alan Wake 2, which definitely pushes the envelope in terms of what hardware is capable of, Lies of P, which is nice to look at, but let's be honest here folks, it looks like a generic Souls-like in terms of the visual department. Then the final nominee in that category is Tears of the Kingdom, which, let's be real, only has the mass market appeal it does because of the Zelda IP being associated with it. If it was any other game, people would be lambasting it for being too bright and for not really looking all that good, because when you get down to it, it's a very washed out looking game. Want cel shading done right? Look no further than Sly Cooper, especially Sly Cooper Thieves in Time, a game which came out in 2013 on hardware that's way lesser than the Switch. Tell me how the fuck a game from 10 fucking years ago looks better than something produced on modern hardware. So now that I've pointed out to a degree how the Game Awards are a sham, let's get into what they nominated for the Game of the Year category. Alan Wake 2, okay, that one I can get behind as Remedy make excellent games. Baldur's Gate 3, I have no experience with beyond watching on a few Twitch streams. I'll pick that one up on sale. Spider-Man 2 was one of the games I was excited about this year, so that one checks out. Resident Evil 4 Remake, I understand this one, but I'd like to see more originality here. Super Mario Bros. Wonder though, no, that game doesn't deserve a nomination for Game of the Year. It's here off-brand recognition alone. Tears of the Kingdom was also nominated, and from what I can tell, the vast majority of Zelda fans, this game is not worthy of a Game of the Year in their eyes. A good game for sure, but not a game that is Game of the Year material. Also, I'll be honest, I agree with them to an extent. The game isn't worthy of Game of the Year, as it's pretty much just a remix of currently popular mechanics in a Zelda skin. Hell, I actually feel like Final Fantasy XVI is more deserving of Game of the Year nods. Which, coming from me, is a big fucking deal. I've not been quiet about how I feel on modern Final Fantasy on this channel. I think those games are okay to good, for the most part, but pale in comparison to their now almost 20 and 30-year-old counterparts. You also have to keep in mind I didn't grow up with the Final Fantasy games that everyone loves. I fucking played these games in my 20s, so I'm not talking about these games with rose-tinted glasses on. For me, they were just good experiences when I was in my early days of getting into JRPGs, which is something else I've noticed. The Game Awards are pretty much designed so Western games clean house. I'll get into that in a little while. I feel like I need to say what games I would have personally nominated for Game of the Year. What I feel are deserving of nominations are Alan Wake 2 just for the technical marvel that it is, Marvel's Spider-Man 2, Final Fantasy XVI, Hi-Fi Rush, and The Legend of Heroes Trails into Reverie. You see what that list is? Good fucking games. It also is good fucking games that show how fucking diverse this year was for gaming. I have said in a previous video this year was the year of the JRPG, which is definitely fucking true. But this year has been so diverse, it's almost like being transported back to the heydays of the PS2 when you couldn't go a year without finding a wide array of unique and interesting games. During the PS2 era, that was more commonplace because video games were still kind of in the Wild West, as 3D gaming was still so fucking new. In 2023, however, games have changed, and diversity up until recently wasn't as commonplace. Basically, the huge games in previous years were games of the Battle Royale genre, and almost every game that was mainstream in some way was trying to copy that. There is nothing inherently wrong with it. Every piece of media borrows from another piece of media. That's just common fucking sense. But when that one thing gets constantly shoved down one's throat, that's when it becomes an issue. This is how I felt about the gaming industry for a long time now. Games just weren't catering to my particular tastes as a gamer. Now I know I'm a counterculture content creator. So much so, I'm basically
the voice of the voiceless!
When it comes to marginalized gamers, I'm going to say the shit that the big creators just don't have the guts to say. I'm gonna say the stuff that corporate shill content creators won't, because there is a whole lot of that in the content creation community.
Oops, I'm breaking the fourth wall.
So I'm going to actually defend my choices for Game of the Year further. Let's start off with Spider-Man 2. I don't feel like I have to say too much on the matter because this selection is fucking obvious. Insomniac have always made good fucking games. The few outliers come mostly thanks to janky hardware like the Oculus because let's face it, VR games are janky no matter how you shake it. And they're always going to be more of a fucking novelty than anything because VR games are just never going to have the mass appeal to become anything more than quirky experiences for the people who have more money than sense. As for Fuse, that game was mediocre, but mostly thanks to the supposed studio interference from EA Games, who have fucking sucked for a long ass time. Seriously, the tagline, EA Games challenge everything, should have been EA Games, this game will challenge your patience. Seriously though, Spider-Man 2 is the type of game that will sell hardware, even if it's not necessarily your type of game. What do you think of when you think of exclusive video games? You think of titles that will push the limits of the hardware at that given point in the console's life cycle. The PS5 being 3 years old is still far from being tapped out. The fact the game's running on all settings at 60 frames per second with ray tracing just proves how powerful the system is. Basically, Spider-Man 2 is doing its job. This one I know I'm going to have to defend a little bit more because some numpty is going to be in the comments section saying how this game cost Square Enix a lot of money because of lost revenue. That might be true to some extent, however when you look at the financial reports most people cite regarding that, most of the losses come from titles like Forspoken, which did a lot more damage to Square's reputation than Final Fantasy XVI did, which they admitted sold around what they were expecting. Also, you have to keep in mind Final Fantasy XVI to date has only been released on one console so far. It's going multi-platform in the future. Also, I know some butthurt Nintendo fan is going to come at me in the comments section about how Tears of the Kingdom moved more units and it's only on one console. That is true, Final Fantasy XVI sold around 3 million units so far, whereas Tears of the Kingdom is sitting around 19.5 million units as well. But there's the rub with that argument. The Nintendo Switch has sold 132 million units to date, making it the third best-selling console of all time. The PS5 at the time of recording has sold just under 47 million units. These economies of scale do not line up. Also, let's face it, Final Fantasy XVI is just a better game on a technical level. I'm covering Alan Wake 2 next for this. Like I said previously, I agree with this entry because Remedy Entertainment, generally speaking, know how to make games incredibly fun. They also have a thirst for pushing what's possible with hardware at a given time. Alan Wake 2, from a technical perspective, pushes the envelope, and that's the type of thing you should be applauding, not just as a gamer, but by the jury of any potential game award as well, because it's partially a thirst for this innovation, which drives game design. Also, I'm sorry Nintendo fans, but the new Mario game and the new Zelda game just don't push what's possible. Part of the problem is Nintendo handicapping their hardware to antiquated status at the time of launch. Now, I know someone in the comments section is going to come along and say I hate Nintendo, which I just don't. Am I primarily a PlayStation guy? Yeah, but that's because there was never enough titles to catch my interest on anything Nintendo related as far back as the N64 days. It's only thanks to some of the Switch releases that I'm like, oh, okay, this interests me. Most of the titles that interest me on Nintendo hardware would be Pokemon for nostalgia reasons, Fire Emblem titles because those games stylistically and gameplay-wise match up with my tastes, and Metroid games, because I do like Metroidvania titles, even if I don't exactly cover them on my channel. You want that type of coverage? Check out my editor, TheMadBelmont. He's mad for that kind of game. But Alan Wake is deserving just for the technical reasons alone. Also, horror games should be given some representation, and it's certainly more deserving than Resident Evil 4, which I'm not saying is a bad game. Far from it. I just don't feel like full-on remakes deserve a Game of the Year nomination. They should have their own category along with remasters. I do, however, feel like localizations do deserve nominations, because at that point they're reaching a wider audience. Remakes and remasters are mostly pandering to people who want a hit of nostalgia. Either way though, Alan Wake 2 is a masterpiece on every level, and deserves the love it gets. Since I just talked about localizations, I have to bring up The Legend of Heroes Trails into Reverie next. This is actually the game that inspired this whole video. I've had multiple people insult my intelligence just for stating I think this game is deserving of a Game of the Year nomination. Their reasoning that it's a niche game. That's fucking bullshit if you ask me. I said previously that games receiving awards should be based off quality. Guess fucking what? That's all Falcom provides, is fucking quality. They're able to achieve what most developers can't with a way smaller budget and a way smaller team. That fucking tells you something. So why do I think Reverie is deserving of a Game of the Year nomination? The fact the game is high quality, has some of the best turn-based gameplay you're going to find, rivaling even Persona for that crown. Which, speaking of Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal, both received various nominations from the Game Awards for the English release. So numpties who say I have no legs to stand on can shut the fuck up. They're the ones who have no fucking ground to stand on. As their intellectual superior, I have the high ground. I actually use my fucking brain. At minimum, Reverie needed to be nominated for RPG of the Year. Also, before someone gets their panties in a twist and says the game looks like a fucking PS2 title, get your goddamn eyes checked. You clearly haven't seen a fucking PS2 game in nearly 20 fucking years, and it's probably time to touch some fucking grass before it makes you look like a gigantic dumbass. Because let's face it, the Game Awards does have a Western bias. As for Hi-Fi Rush, that game is beautiful. It's also a very niche game to some extent. When was the last time a platformer with action combat came out? They were plentiful during the PS2 days because they were the popular genre of the day. They all but disappeared though because my generation went through that edgy emo phase where everything needed to have a gun. You'd think even the nerds had become gun-toting rednecks. Shooters are still predominantly the popular genre for whatever reason, but Hi-Fi Rush dares to be different. And that difference is what makes it stand out. It's even a unique take within its genre because it utilizes timing your attacks to the beat of the music, giving the game a definitive flow. Also, it's not confined to potato hardware, meaning an indie studio was able to make something incredibly nice looking, but its design cues all come from a bygone era, one that desperately needs to come back in the world of gaming. So I've covered the games I feel deserving of nominations for the Game of the Year. If you've liked the video so far, hit the subscribe button. What we're going to discuss next is the blatantly obvious bias towards Western games and Western developers. 3 of the 6 are made by Western studios. However, when you look at the Japanese nominations, you'll quickly see something that's as plain as dry toast. These games have Western-inspired game design. Resident Evil 4 is a Japanese take on Western-style horror. The Mario game is a traditional-styled 2D platformer. Those have been mostly popular among Western indie developers in recent years, hence the Metroidvania resurgence. As for the Zelda game, well, Tears of the Kingdom is a sequel to Breath of the Wild, which was heavily inspired by Western RPGs. Are you seeing where I'm going with this? Because it should be plain as day. If it isn't, I'll spell it out for you. These games all have Western-inspired elements, and they keep their Japanese sensibilities to the back burner. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Western games, far from it. Some of my favorite games of all time are Western ones. What I am saying, though, is there's a clear bias in the style of game that gets nominated for the Game Awards. Meaning a whole bunch of Japanese games just get snubbed simply for being what they are. Also, like I said earlier, this keeps the biggest names in the gaming industry at the top of people's minds, and it outright ignores the smaller titles that are equally deserving of love and attention. For those reasons, I've boycotted the Game Awards entirely. I've now enlightened you on why the Game Awards are a sham. You're welcome. Until next time, keep blazing that trail.